Hello! As you've probably noticed, Trent Alexander-Arnold has been doing this thing for a long time where he starts at right back but comes inside the pitch to be more of a midfielder. And it makes perfect sense. Or does it? Because Jon Mackenzie and I, here he is, are going to tell you why we think, although Alexander-Arnold is amazing and it does make a lot of sense being in this position, there are a lot of problems with it that are tactical and they don't really need to be doing it anymore. Isn't that right, John?
That is right, because I think the most important thing to remember about tactics is that it's always trade-offs. So if you're going to bring Alexander-Arnold inside the pitch, it's going to give you upsides, it's going to be things that he offers you that you're not getting when he's playing out wide, but you're also going to get downsides as well. There's going to be a reason why moving him inside is going to be worse as well. I think that's what we really want to get in touch with today.
Now, are you wearing shoes?
I am wearing shoes.
That's good. He's wearing shoes, let's go. So the first question to look at with Alexander-Arnold doing this is like, did they move him there to get more out of Alexander-Arnold, or was it to fix a problem? We could look at it really from what happened last season. What we know is that they had a lot of issues last season, Liverpool, with new players. So you had a whole new front line. Nunez he started with, of course, up top, but this is the lineup from against Chelsea. What we had last season was the forward press wasn't working the way it should have done in the past, which then had knock-on effects.
Yeah, I think the main problem that Liverpool had was personnel issues, which meant that their out-of-possession stuff just wasn't as aggressive and as functional as it had been. And the result of that was that where they normally would have been winning the ball higher up the field in situations where the ball had been turned over, they weren't doing that anymore, and actually teams were being able to progress the ball through the middle quite aggressively. And this, I think, was a problem that they really needed to sort out. And the solution to that, in part, was saying, well, if we move Alexander-Arnold inside, we're adding another body in there. It's going to help us in those transition moments.
And what they started doing, even before they moved him here, because it was the natural progression, was that they kept Alexander-Arnold sort of deeper, so they had more of a three in these three, Robertson still pushing forwards. And then what happened is, because they're not putting pressure on here, and rather than Alexander-Arnold stepping up to try and counter-press or just to try and win the ball up here, he was then left kind of isolated, so teams would just leave someone pinned on him, or they'd be able to double up quite easily because he was deeper rather than pushing up. And so that didn't make sense either, even though he's in a position to be able to play all these like lovely long passes he can play from here. And of course that then also meant that Robertson was still getting up and down this left. But this new thing where he pushes inside, what you've got is more of a back three like this.
Yeah, and I think that what we've seen from Liverpool in the last few seasons was that their fullbacks were the most aggressive, almost creative players to an extent. So there'd be situations where you would expect to see Robertson and Alexander-Arnold really high up the pitch, and that leaves these two centre-backs really exposed. And I think what was starting to happen is always the case in the Premier League, that after a few seasons, teams become very aware of where your weaknesses are. We were seeing a lot of oppositions just trying to target in those fullback areas defensively as well. So you were seeing from Liverpool a little bit more of a hesitancy to get both of their fullbacks forward at the same time, and that's why it sort of ended up being Alexander-Arnold, I think, sitting in this back three originally, because it just gives a little bit of cover on the back post. But what we were seeing a lot was teams actually trying to target doubling up players around Alexander-Arnold in those transition moments to try and hit them at the back post.
So why is the inverted fullback position a problem for Liverpool? There's a couple of reasons. I want to do the defensive one first, right? Now, we know that, like we said, what they do currently is that Alexander-Arnold pushes in here when they push up the pitch. And from here, that the benefits you get from him are these amazing passes, like long passes or just short link passes. He's a clever little player. When he's facing the play, he's absolutely brilliant. One of the best ball strikers in the world. We kind of know that. To do this is that Robertson needs to stay a bit deeper. Now, he's more of a winger, I'd say, than even a left back, but he does the role very well, obviously. But this, of course, means that naturally the centre backs have to change. Because Konate has to come out and push here, what you get is Konate is covering an awful lot of space either side. He's got to go here and press. And Konate likes to get tight to people immediately and push up. And so naturally, if the ball is played over to this side of the pitch and he goes to push that, it means that Alexander-Arnold is the guy who's got to come back in. He was talking about that after the game, the Chelsea game, saying that's kind of half the role, is that they have to work out if Konate goes to right back to push this, he then has to drop into centre back, but often he doesn't do it quick enough, or isn't just quite. He's not a centre back player. He's not like Reece James, who's more of a player like that. So often they have this gap. So you have Van Dijk trying to defend all this bit, which then pulls you over. So if you're trying to double up on this side of the pitch and you're really isolating Konate and Alexander-Arnold's lost, then players naturally just sort of drop into these gaps, because Robertson again isn't really a centre back. And then again, if he's here trying to cover into this bit, then you're leaving this guy spare. So there's always chances either on the left-hand side of the pitch where people double up on them, or someone floating free on the right. And that's the defensive problem that they've not really solved between Konate and Alexander-Arnold. It works on paper, but in like those quick transitional moments when you've got to make the snap decision, that's where I think they're weaker.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that what's happening here is that you are making a transition between this as a defensive shape and then this as a in possession shape. And I think in those situations, you're always going to have weaknesses that emerge because you're going to transition between one and the other. And that's what we're seeing teams really trying to target now. If you can win the ball quickly, if you can overload in this kind of area and get the ball into that space, then there's always going to be this question, does Konate come out and Alexander-Arnold drop in? Or does Alexander-Arnold come across and Konate drop in? And I think those are the sorts of movements we're going to see now. Coaches really trying to target those sorts of shifts between shapes.
Do you know one more thing as well, it's probably relevant, is that the way they use Salah in this as well. What Klopp wants is to have these rotational triangles, so these guys swap around a lot and they can move it all over the pitch. You can keep him deeper and get more attacking players further up. Then Salah gets kind of isolated over here, so you're not getting the most out of Salah, who's kind of isolated and he got taken off in the second half, right? Couldn't get in the game, and that's probably linked to him being inside a little bit.
Yeah, I think part of the reason why you see fullbacks inverting is because they can play this pinning role, which means that they're going to influence the position of the opposition players. So let's imagine that it's probably going to be Chukwuemeka in this situation, is tasked with making sure Alexander-Arnold isn't free. If Alexander-Arnold comes inside, then Chukwuemeka is going to come across. Now, let's say that the ball is with Konate now on the outside, of the centre-back on this side in the build-up phase. What you've done by pinning Chukwuemeka central is you've opened up access to Salah in this sort of area. Now, if that pass is played, what's going to happen is Salah is going to drop in on this angle, pick the ball up back to goal, probably with another player in behind them. And this, I think, is actually reducing Salah's usefulness, right? Because what you want Salah playing out wide in this kind of area, being able to run in these kind of angles towards goals. And so I think part of the problem is that in your build-up phase, you're actually introducing aspects of team play that aren't really beneficial to the players that Liverpool have.
This is one thing with Alexander-Arnold, right? So we're not saying he can't do this role. He's great at it. The difference is that it has knock-on effects tactically to the rest of Liverpool's play, and that's the real kind of issue here. So here's an example of him doing it absolutely perfectly and why it works. So you see Konate is the kind of right-sided player here. Alexander-Arnold's moved inside, which means that just to make this shape work, you've got to have Szoboszlai wide or Salah wide to make that work. Because Salah's inside the pitch, when Alexander-Arnold receives the ball here, it goes through McAllister into him. So McAllister's playing as the 6, he's more of the pivot role, and Alexander-Arnold's more of the right midfielder role here, which kind of works. So you get Jota dropping in as the false 9. That means you've got Salah's over here somewhere, and Szoboszlai's got to be over here somewhere.
Just about see his head on the bottom of the screen.
Oh, really? Oh, that's his head there.
So he's about here.
Yeah, okay, cool. So then he's going to make an out-to-in run. Now, we can look at more of the tactical stuff with Chelsea in a second, but you see here that what then happens is Szoboszlai is playing wide right here, so he's playing the Alexander role of the past, where he'd be out wide and being more of the right back. And you get Salah making the run in behind. So then Alexander-Arnold receives on the turn, looks up, he can play that pass. That's the massive benefit because Salah gets in behind here and scores. He's like a tiny bit offside. So Alexander-Arnold can do this role. He can do it really, really well. That's not the issue. The issue is the downside, as you would say, John, to all of it.
Yeah, I think we're talking now about what's happening in possession. I think actually this, to me, looks very similar to what we would see from classic Klopp Liverpool, right? Because we often see, let's imagine this is Jordan Henderson, he would pull across out wide because Alexander-Arnold is going to invert. Alexander-Arnold has been inverting for Klopp teams for years, just not in that way that forms a box midfield, right? So his angle is usually to get up the pitch and then move inside into this half space where he's supremely creative because he's one of the best ball strikers, creative passers that we have in world football. And this is, for me, this is what you want from Alexander-Arnold. This is the situation you want him in this half space with passes to make that he can get through to his teammates. You've got the other central midfielder here just moving out in order to offer support, but also if the ball's turned over, you've got cover there as well.
So even though we know some of the problems in transition, John, this looks like it absolutely works and they should just do this all the time because then we can play these through balls that get goals.
Yeah, I agree. I think that in the first 30 minutes of the game against Chelsea, Liverpool were really good at actually causing problems in the sort of spaces that we saw that disallowed goal being generated in. So you've got Mohamed Salah in this kind of area. Szoboszlai is going to be playing around here as well. And if you can get Alexander-Arnold into this half space as well, what you end up doing is just causing a huge overload, particularly around Colwill and Chilwell. Chilwell in possession was playing, he said after the game, as a left winger, so he really high up the field. Actually, out of possession, he was coming inside, and I think that was partly because you don't want to allow this half space to open up for Alexander-Arnold, but also partly because they've only got 2 players in the midfield as well, so you need a little bit of extra coverage here. And actually, what Liverpool did really well was cause problems. They got isolation with Salah and Colwill, and they were causing all kinds of problems here. But the issue was that through the game, actually, we saw Alexander-Arnold getting into these spaces less and less. He actually, because he was moving inside to pick the ball up, in possession. Actually, it just took him too long to get into these kind of areas where he's going to be really, really dangerous. And I think this is where the problem comes down, right? Moving Alexander-Arnold inside is really good, as you said, if you're struggling to progress the ball.
Yeah.
And it gives you more passing angles. It allows you to play these balls through the lines, which is really dangerous. And last season, Liverpool didn't really have anyone who was able to do that. But what that means is it comes with that downside of you're now taking him out of this situation where he's going to be really dangerous creatively, where he's going to be playing these half-space passes into the box. And I think this is what Liverpool were missing against Chelsea. They made the decision to play him as a progressive ball player rather than a creative ball player. And the issue is that Liverpool have Alexis Mac Allister playing as the pivot in this game. He can actually do a lot of this progressive passing as well. So it felt to me like Alexander-Arnold was wasted for most of the game.
But then Mac Allister won't play there the whole time. So what will happen is that, he'll play either right or left. Probably Szoboszlai on the right and then Mac Allister maybe on the left as midfield once they get a holding midfield player to play in there.
If what you're wanting to get out of him is actually progressive passes through the middle, then by all means invert him in certain games. But I think at the moment, the problems that they had last season being solved by upgrading in terms of personnel. So we've talked about Alexis Mac Allister, we've talked about Szoboszlai being brought in as well. Liverpool are searching for a defensive midfielder / pivot who again will be able to do, you would hope, some of this work as well. In which case, surely what you want from Alexander-Arnold as just a supreme ball striker is to get him into situations where he's offering the most value in terms of goal scoring. Yeah. And that for me is in this half space here. Now, the general idea is to get him from here to here. So you can still do that in the new system. Yeah. But the problem is that it depends so much on tempo. It depends so much on actually building progression in a repeatable way, which allows Alexander-Arnold to catch up with the play. And I think that's what's not working for them right now.
Do you know what's also interesting to me is that, like Alexander-Arnold was saying after the game, we know this for ages, is that all these changes they've made over the last while are to do with the team being too predictable and people knowing how they play. But like, we already know how they play. We've already sort of figured that out. And like Chelsea set up in a way that I think they suspected they would do this thing with the inverted fullback. They set up with it looked like a 3-5-2 or 3-4-3 or something on paper. Actually, it was more like a 3. Chilwell was a winger. James was something between a winger and maybe just a slightly deeper winger, maybe just slightly off here. Gallagher was playing as a single pivot player, and Enzo, so these guys all pushed up here. And they were sort of playing in between Liverpool. So Liverpool were like this, very nice and compact. They played either side of them, so they had loads of width either side, so they always had progression. And they had maybe Jota playing in here with these guys in their compact shape. So what you've got is a team that can sort of play around them if they're good at it, and they were quite good at it. And then you've got players playing between lines here, almost like this, but then they're doubling up. So you've got Chilwell and Chukwuemeka sort of dealing with this thing here. So if he moves inside, then suddenly what you've got is like these players who are then doubling up on Konate in this wide area if you can get the ball there. To me, it's a sign that Chelsea, I don't think they'll play like this every single game. I think this is specifically because they worked out how Liverpool play either with a box or without. If it's a box, they've still got like either players who can dart inside the box so they can just play through them like the 3 like this with maybe these guys super wide and then Sterling in a little pocket. Or they've got, if it's going to be just the normal 3, they've got players in the spaces between the lines to deal with it that way. So it's another example of like teams know how Liverpool play already now. There are clear problems with it. So my question to you, Jon Mackenzie, is do you still have no shoes on? You have shoes on. Do you think that Trent Alexander-Arnold should be playing as a right back still, or they should move into midfield? What should they be doing? What should Klopp do?
I think they should be using Alexander-Arnold in that flexible way. I think they should have the option of being able to play him as an inverting fullback because he does offer upside there, as we've said. But I think the problem is that actually the way that Jurgen Klopp teams are set up to play traditionally actually works quite nicely with the setup that they have now. They brought in 2 8s who can play, that counter-pressing game that wasn't happening as much next season. Right. Yes, they need to bring in a defensive midfielder, but if they do that, why not then have the option of being able to play the classic Klopp 4-3-3 anyway? So for me, it's all about being sensible about where you're going to get the benefit from. There may be some games where you think, actually, Alexander-Arnold will be better deployed playing these progressive passes through the middle. There's also going to be games where he's going to be better deployed getting him into that half space with more space and time on the ball earlier on in the play so that he can then play those dangerous passes.
So is the Alexander-Arnold experiment working?
I think it's sort of confused. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and it's dependent on very much the game situation. So I think this adds something to Liverpool, but at the moment it's being used so sort of in such a raw way that there's some games where you look at it and think it actually impacts the game. I felt like in the game against Chelsea, Liverpool had the upside because they were getting Alexander-Arnold into those areas, but as the game wore on, they changed the way that they were playing in possession so that he was just getting clogged up in the midfield area, and they just stopped causing all the kinds of problems that Chelsea were allowing them to in isolating Salah around Colwill and having these opportunities to play these dangerous passes in behind.
So there you have it. Alexander-Arnold, really good player, great inverted fullback. Should he keep doing it? Maybe yes, probably not all the time. We'll find out this season.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.